You are listening to The Wellness Project. I'm your host, Des, and this is episode number 123. If you're a fan of the podcast, I would really appreciate you leaving me a review either on iTunes or on Spotify. I would be so grateful. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited that you are here. On today's episode, I speak with Anne Poirier. She used to work in the fitness industry as a fitness instructor and personal trainer, but as she learned more about the fitness industry and diet culture, and as she is an eating disorder survivor, she has moved into the realm of being a non-diet coach and a body image expert. Anne is the author of the book, The Body Joyful: My Journey from Self-Loathing to Self-Acceptance. On today's episode, she's going to speak with us about her experience with her eating disorder and her recovery. She's going to give us so much information about why diets don't work and different things you can do to support your body in a more healthy way. I think this is going to be a great conversation. I'm so glad you're here. Help me welcome Anne. All right, everyone. I am here with Anne Poirier. Anne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Desiree, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm just really looking forward to this conversation. So today we are going to talk about not only diet culture, the different harmful aspects diet culture has on our lives, but we're also going to talk about your own personal experience with eating disorders. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So to get us started, can you just introduce yourself to our audience today and let us know about your journey with your eating disorder, what that looked like for you, and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Again, my name is Anne Poirier, and my journey has been with diet culture, basically immersed in diet culture and what I call society's thin ideal. And it started really early in my life. Back in the 70s, aging myself a little bit there, I had a few experiences that really kind of internalized this feeling that I did not look right. My body was not right. And part of the experiences were nicknames in school, going to the doctor and having the doctor tell my mom, you better watch what she's eating. You better watch her weight. You don't want her to gain any more weight right now because her weight is on the high trajectory, on their little charts that they had in the 70s. And then I wasn't really fitting into the cool clothes, the clothes that the other kids were fitting into. And so these kind of sent messages to me. And I basically internalized this feeling that I'm fat, my body's not right, and I need to do something to change that because something's wrong with me. So I really felt these kind of, I call them seeds. Seeds were planted in my brain of not being the right size. And that just projected me onto a lifetime almost of diet culture, going on to diets. And my very first diet at 11 years old sent me to the hospital with an eating disorder. I had anorexia nervosa. I was diagnosed fairly late into my treatment, considering no one really knew what was going on with me. Basically, I just was not eating very much. I was hiding from my parents any food so that they thought that I was eating, but I wasn't. I was exercising a lot. I lied about food all the time, and I just got smaller and smaller. And finally, my mom, who I count for saving my life basically at that time, because eating disorders weren't heard of in the mid 70s very much. They started to get a little bit more popularized, and I don't know if that's the right term, but people heard about them more after Karen Carpenter passed away with an eating disorder. And that's when kind of opened the door to this space and place of something that needs to be looked at and needs to be studied. And we need to find a way to work with people who have these eating disorders. So she got me into treatment with a psychologist. I got myself better enough to get out of the hospital and to live kind of a normal life. Unfortunately, the feeling of not being good enough, the feeling of my body's not right, real negative self-talk and poor body image just stayed with me. I had a couple of relapses into disordered eating / eating disorder behavior, both in college. with a comment from a coach. So it's just interesting how sometimes we can connect when we're on the other side. We can connect what may have triggered events and thought process. And a coach just, we had to get weighed in before the season in college. And she just looked at me up and down and said, "What'd you do all summer, Anne? Eat?" And I remember just spinning completely back into restricting, over exercising, and really being overly obsessed with my body. And then I had another relapse in my 40s when I was going through a divorce. So this stayed with me for a long time, just always on and off diets in the fitness industry itself, always thinking I didn't look good enough. I think a lot of my life was taken up, a lot of the space in my head is a good way of putting it. A lot of space in my head was taken up by thoughts of what I should eat, what I shouldn't eat, when I should exercise, how many calories is in this, how many calories are in that, what did I eat yesterday, what do I have to do for exercise tomorrow. It was just this constant voice in my head, and it just continued on and on and on. And it wasn't really until the third time, basically, I was in disordered eating patterns and disordered exercise, compulsive exercise patterns, that my boss at the time pulled me aside and said, "You need to get some help." And that was the time that I think I was finally ready for some help. So I went back to therapy and started to just do my own research. I dove into, this can't be good for me. This is something that I have to get a hold of, or else I'm going to miss my daughter's lives. I'm going to miss a lot of my life consumed in my head. And so that was the time that when I went back to therapy, then I found someone who I just really connected with. And that set me on a path towards healing. She got me connected to journaling and started to just journal all of my thoughts and feelings down, which was a big part of my healing as well. And so after, I started to get kind of feeling better about where I was going. But then I was in the fitness industry and thinking, there's something not right about the fitness industry. Here I am telling people to exercise more and eat less, and this isn't working. I've been doing it my whole life, and there's something not connected here. So that's when I went back to school, and I went to a graduate program in eating disorders, and I learned all about intuitive eating, health at every size, why diets don't work, lots of researched proof that I've been doing stuff that doesn't work, and people have known about it for 50 years, and we don't know anything about it. So I was getting angry and frustrated with the industry, diet industry, the exercise industry. And that's when I stepped away from being a fitness instructor and personal trainer and said, I'm turning the corner. I'm going to do something different now with my life. And that's where I am kind of now, is working with people in body image and emotional eating, and trying to step away from diet culture and society's thin ideal and move towards a life that's more fulfilling, that's full of joy and playful movement and enjoying foods. So that's pretty much kind of my story in a long version, I guess.
Oh, wow. Anne, thank you so much for sharing all of this. There is just so much I want to dive into. As you were talking, I was just writing everything down because I didn't want to forget any of my questions or thoughts. There's just so much here. I really appreciate you being on here today and sharing your story. It's so, so important. And like you mentioned, I do think that eating disorders are even on the rise now. I don't know that for sure, but I don't know if it's just because we're talking about it more, and there's even some movies about eating disorders. It's just definitely, we definitely have more awareness. And I don't know if that's what makes me think they're on the rise, that it's just we talk about it more. So I don't actually know the numbers, but also correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't eating disorders one of the deadliest mental illnesses?
They are, and because they're linked to all other things too, depression, isolation, sometimes suicide. They're a deadly disease, and you're absolutely right. They're on the rise. One of the most impactful stats that I've heard coming out of COVID, not only do we have higher levels of anxiety, depression, and suicide, eating disorders, there was 101 increase in hospitalizations of girls between the age of 12 and 18 through COVID. 102% increase. I don't even know how to say that. If there were 100 girls in a year that were hospitalized for eating disorders, there was at least 200 or more at this point. So it is a problem that we want to try to address. And how can we prevent? We want to be able to address people who have eating disorders, but also how can we start to work on this prevention so that this doesn't happen as our next generation continues to grow?
Absolutely. And I have to say, I'm not incredibly surprised just because, like you said, we internalize the messages we receive, and those messages are everywhere.
Mm,
I mean, any commercial, social media, anywhere you look, those messages of thinness are
mm.
so profound. And I like that you talk about that, health at every weight. And there's something I wanted you to actually describe a little bit. You talked about the thin ideal. Could you define that for myself and our listeners?
Sure. It's connected to diet culture and it is everywhere. But what we have been programmed to believe is that smaller, leaner, thinner is both healthier and more desirable and morally superior. Like that is the way you will get jobs. That is the way that you will be accepted. That is the way that life will, you can only be happy if. And that's what I think is such a hard line to see, what we're actually seeing in social media as well as in magazines or anywhere, as far as Photoshop and airbrushing. There's so much there that is just kind of projected onto us, and we take everything as face value. We have to try to start to decipher some of that for all of us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's not even sometimes even as subtle as, the airbrushing, the Photoshop. Like we know that in our brains. Well, maybe some people don't, but we know that. But then there's these outright overt messages, like even that message from your coach. I mean, that's horrific, but it's not uncommon, especially on social media now. I see comments like that all the time, whether it's a celebrity or just an everyday average person. There's all these comments about fatness, and people equate that with ugly. And I think there's like a really good pushback now. And like you said, we are kind of embracing that health and beauty at every size and kind of normalizing that. And there is that idea that thinness equals healthy. And I think a lot of that almost fat phobia, it's disguised as people being concerned for somebody's health. Thinness doesn't equal healthy. It doesn't equal fit.
Correct. Neither do people. Like I think about people in large bodies. We all know people in larger bodies that are healthy and people in larger bodies that are unhealthy, just as we know people in smaller bodies that are healthy and people in smaller bodies that are unhealthy. They're not one and the same, but I kind of think of it as brainwashed to think that smaller and thinner means healthy. If something is posted on social media with somebody with a larger body, it's automatically, we have to kind of check in with our own biases. What are we thinking about people in different size bodies? And what does that look like for us? Because why wouldn't we think certain things if that's all we've ever been told?
Right, exactly. Exactly. And I think with conversations like this, and I think we're normalizing different body sizes now, which I think is really great. So I do see things getting better. We have a very long way to go. Like you said, we're enmeshed in this diet culture. It's very insidious. So I want to get back to a little bit of your personal experience. How old were you when you were diagnosed with anorexia?
I was 12. So 11/12, kind of, I started dieting when I was 11, and then I was diagnosed and started to get treatment as I was 12. This is, sixth grade, seventh grade, going into junior high. I have a whole story in my book about gym shorts, those silly gym shorts that we had to wear in gym class, and the trauma that actually caused, not only for me, but for many other people that I've talked to at this day and age, that story resonates only because they're like, "Oh my gosh, same for me." The whole story around not feeling the right size, even in the 70s, was so grand for me anyway. Just I think it was all the internalization of stuff, words and phrases and looks and experiences, I guess. About 3 years of treatment that I went through. So I will tell you that I don't remember very much of junior high or even my freshman year in high school. It's kind of non-existent. I just don't remember anything about that period of time other than what I see in pictures. After that, when my weight was restored and I was getting back into activities, then I start to remember and recall some of my experiences. But it's very interesting how much the eating disorder really took me out of my whole life.
That is really interesting. And something I find interesting too is that you actually had, well, your mom being one, but your boss, you had two people come to you saying, they're concerned, you need help. How did those conversations go? And before your mom and boss came to you saying that you needed help, did you know yourself that you needed help?
Well, I'll tell you, that's such a great question. The way that it all went down with my mom is she had me stripped down and stand in front of a mirror. And she was sitting on the bed and asked me, "What do you see?" And I, looking in the mirror, saw what I always saw. I saw fat. And she saw, obviously, me very frail and fragile. And she knew this isn't good because that's not what I saw. And it was what I saw because our images do get distorted. I don't think I knew I had a problem. I was very angry about having to go talk to someone. I didn't want to talk to anybody about food. I didn't want to be involved in any of this. And that's probably why I ended up in the hospital and realized that, well, if I want to at least live and get out of this place, I got to do something. And so it was kind of I just did what I was told in order to be able to do the things I wanted to do. And that's how I kind of became aware of trying to put on weight just to appease people around me that were concerned. When my boss came to me, I am very grateful to her. She's one of my best friends. And she's not my boss anymore. She's just a really good friend. And it took a lot for her to say, "I understand that you don't think you need help, but you really do need help. And this is what I see." Because she cared so much, she actually wrote me a letter first, and then we had a conversation. By having the letter first and really hearing her concerns, her genuine concerns for my health and well being, and then also the concerns of the community that I was working in, because the community was actually watching this happen. That conversation was much harder. It had a lot of tears, and I had a lot of trying to grasp the fact that how could I have fallen back into such poor self image and behaviors with everything that I continued to learn and do? I wasn't thinking, it's hard to put into words. So, see, got me kind of a little bit like, I don't know. I was completely unaware that I had a problem. And so when it was brought to my attention, I realized she was right. And I realized I had to do some work on myself. I had to get back to work on me in order if I wanted to heal and if I wanted to keep my job, both of those things.
Right, absolutely. Because eating disorders, they don't only impact your physical health, but they impact all different areas of your life. I mean, your relationships, like you said, your job, it's all consuming.
I've had some really great people in my life that have helped me on my journey. And I've met a lot of people with eating disorders, recovered from eating disorders, and many of them say they've had someone intervene to help them. And that alone can really start the healing process. But it depends on where you are in the journey, too, if you decide to listen or want to listen.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up, that your mom and your boss, now good friend, came to you and said, "Hey, I think you need help." And that your boss had actually written you a letter first. Cause I think so many people do see something wrong in their
Mm.
loved one's life, but they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They're scared to say anything. I think for a lot of people, it's easier just to brush it aside and hope that it resolves on its
Mm,
own. So I'm really glad that you had those two people in your life that did come to you. And I think it's helpful for our listeners to hear that it's okay to say something and it's okay to voice your concerns, even planting that little seed that, like you said, you were completely unaware, just planting that seed like, hey, there's something maybe you should look at and think about.
correct. And I think the letter piece, that can be a really great way of breaking the ice without having a confrontation right away and allowing yourself to share your concerns to them in what you see. It's not anything that they're doing because they're unaware. They're unaware of where they are in their journey, most likely. Just by showing your care and concern for their health and well being is a good place to start.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned too that you were dieting first and then that kind of led into the eating disorder. Because I do want to talk about why you think that diets are harmful and unhelpful. And I would like if you could give our listeners some alternatives because a lot of people do struggle with their weight. They do struggle with their self-acceptance. I mean, everybody's New Year's resolutions always lose weight, but you said,
Mm.
the over exercising, not eating as much, it's not effective. So I'd like to get into what you think is effective and why diets are harmful and ineffective.
That's another great question because I don't know if everyone realizes or people realize that for the most part, 95% of diets fail. They work until they don't work. First, we go on a quote unquote a diet, which is a restricted eating plan. The plan that we've been taught in order to lose weight, you need to eat less and exercise more. That's what we've been taught. That's all we've ever known. Now, that's been around for over 50 years. And so, why is it that we've had more and more diets come aboard over the past 50 years? And at the same time, the obesity, quote unquote, I don't like to use the term obesity epidemic, but that has risen. There's a correlation between the diet industry and obesity or people getting larger. And that needs to be taken a look at. Why is that? Well, there's obviously something not working with diets. For most of the people that go on a diet, they come off a diet and they usually, within a period of time, gain the weight back that they lost plus some. And the reason for that is because the body doesn't want to be restricted. It feels unsafe. If we have lower, I use the term energy versus calorie. If I'm not taking in enough energy for my body to do the things it needs to do, I am going to preserve energy. And the way I'll preserve energy is to hold on to fat stores so that I can make it to the next time my body person eats. With that said, there's a drop in metabolism. So our body realizes we're not taking in enough energy. So the metabolism drops to save and protect us. If you think about feast and famine, it's very much the same thing. Our ancestors would feast and then they would go days without food. And so the body had to design a mechanism to keep them safe so that they could live longer. And that's what our body still does today. We have a spike in cortisol. That's exactly what its job is, to protect the body. It's keeping the body safe by holding on to fat stores. And then with the metabolism being lower and we go off the diet, then we start to eat normally, we're going to gain more weight because the metabolism has already dropped. We have a couple of other hormonal things that go on when we restrict. One is our hunger hormone, which spikes up, it's kind of telling you, you need some more food. It's trying to get you to eat more. And then our leptin, which is our fullness hormone, drops out. So there's no signal from the stomach to say, hey, we're full now. So we have all these physiological things working against us on a diet. And that's why people will go on diets, but then they will end up gaining the weight back. And in the meantime, they're feeling like they're a failure. I failed the diet. And I like to try to tell people that you didn't fail. Diets have failed you. Diet and diet culture has fed you that this is the only way. to lose weight is to go on a diet. And so we do have to figure out a new way, and we have to take apart this eat less, move more formula and start to realize it has a lot to do with a lot of things. And so, how do we tune back into our bodies? What does hunger feel like? What does hunger feel like in my body? And that's where I went to get certified as an intuitive eating counselor, because I really started to understand by connecting with my body on a physiological level was a way for me to start to understand and debunk some of my stories that I've had in my head about you shouldn't be hungry. Why are you hungry now? You just ate. Some of the kind of stories that we share with ourselves, and saying, okay, how do I connect better and more closely with my body? And then start to share with myself some self-compassion and some self-care, because if I'm beating myself up all the time, that is negatively impacting my whole outlook and negatively impacting my self-esteem and my self-worth. And that's adding stress to my body, which what does stress do? Increases our cortisol, which kind of signals us to hold on to fat. So it all is working against us. And as soon as we can step back and start to see ourselves differently, see our bodies differently, and that's, you had alluded to health at every size, and now we're looking at body neutrality and seeing our body for what it does rather than what it looks like. And that allows us to step into treating our bodies better, respecting our bodies, honoring our bodies and what they need in the form of food, in the form of movement, in the form of stress reduction, in the form of sleep. There's so many different systems of the body that we need to take a look at, as if we want to release weight, how do we do that in a way that's not buying into diet culture and society's thin ideal, but taking care of ourselves and listening to our bodies?
That makes so much sense, and it's really sad that all we're taught is exercise, 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 limit what you're eating. So I really like that you explained all of that. It makes so much sense. And do you have I really like how you mentioned connecting with our bodies. Do you have any recommendations on how somebody can start to connect with their body again?
It's actually starting to become aware of our own voices. Can we become aware of how we talk to ourselves when we look in the mirror? How do we see the world when it comes to how do we relate to the world? When do we show up as our full selves? When do we show up quiet and reserved and kind of or not show up at all? Oh, I don't want to go there because they're going to think I don't look as good, or I've gained weight, or I don't want to be seen in this body. It's stopping and pausing and saying, okay, can I detach from some of these stories that I've continued to tell myself and question them? Question them with curiosity and with non judgment. Is it really true that my body is why people like me? Is it true that if my body is in a different size, everything will be different? And those are really hard questions to kind of sit with, because we do have weight bias in this country. And even though we're changing that, if we think about the people that we genuinely care about and why we like them, why we want to hang around them, and you think about the qualities and traits of your friends and your family that you love, it has nothing to do with the size of their body. And how can we detach our self-worth from our body size and our self-esteem from our body size? And it start to connect to thinking of our bodies as these amazing vehicles that we get to experience life in. The only way we experience joy or sadness is in this body. The only way we experience great times with friends is in this body. And so, how do we see the body as our vehicle and not as the only thing that matters in society?
That's all so true, and it makes me sad because I there's a podcaster that I listen to her podcast, and she does live videos in her Facebook group and on her Facebook page and things like that, and she talks about how she was so ashamed of her body that she would not do video. She wouldn't allow people to take pictures of her, and it's just so interesting because now she does all these videos. She's really worked on her body image and her self-acceptance, and she's just such this force, and I just can't imagine not being able to watch her, and it's so sad that a lot of people's views of themselves and their poor body image and not accepting themselves really does, I mean, it impacts our behaviors, it impacts our relationships, it impacts how we show up in the world. It really holds us back sometimes, and just to think that this person that I admire so much, if she let that shame conquer her mind, that I wouldn't even really know about her. And, she's made such a big impact on me. And it's just crazy to think that there's so many people out there that have so much to say and have such a big way that they could show up in the world, but that their body image is holding them back.
It's so true. I mean, there are so many people in this world, and we're all so individual. We have completely different genes. There's no two people alike. How are we expected to look a certain way when we're just all so different and we grew up in different families? Taking a step aside and asking yourself, am I living the life that I want to live just because this body isn't the way I think, and that's key, right? I think it should be. And where did that think it should be come from? Where does our body image come from? And if you think about the answers to that, most of the answers to where our body image comes from is external. It's from the outside. It's from medical doctors. It's from friends. It's from family. It's from what we see in the movies or on social media. It's not internal. It becomes internalized when we start to talk to ourselves and tell ourselves the story that we're not good enough in the body that we have, and that our body is wrong. We don't have the right body. It's a wrong body, and that it needs to be fixed. It's a problem. And that's when we have to kind of dive inside to the internal voices and the internal self-talk to start to question that and understand that really it's all coming from the outside. We've internalized everything we've heard since basically we were babies. And that kind of sets us up for a really hard time with certain people. I think it's certain personalities that grasp onto certain things, and all of a sudden, we're traveling down this, whether it's the diet path or the self-worth path or isolation, and just not experiencing our lives because we think something's wrong.
Exactly. And something I really like that you mentioned too, you talked about through your recovery from your eating disorder. You talked about different things like journaling your thoughts and feelings and the idea of this playful movement. Are there any other things that either from your experience, your personal experience, or that you know of that would be helpful for people that are struggling with either repeated dieting or an eating disorder or disordered eating?
Yes, I think the biggest thing is to start to become aware of your own behaviors, and our behaviors stem from how we feel, and how we feel stems from what we think. So if we have this kind of, what we think leads us to how we feel, which leads us to our behaviors. And so if we can start with what we're thinking and why we're thinking that, and start to be curious on our self-talk, that can start to help this process, because it kind of bubbles down. One of the analogies that I use around body itself is, I call it the good gift, bad gift. And when we get a good gift from somebody, we take care of it, we treasure it. It's important to us. We wear it all the time if it's something to wear. If it's a picture, we put it up and we make sure we take care of it. But when we get a gift that's just not quite for us, we put it in the closet. It goes to the bottom of the closet. We regift it maybe, we shoo it off to Goodwill, but we don't take care of it. It's kind of our innate things we care about, things that we cherish, we take care of. And when we can start to think about our bodies as something that we live in, it's our home right here, right now, today's home, regardless of what it looks like. How can we start to respect and cherish the body that we have? By doing that, it kind of snowballs into the way you treat yourself with self-care, the way you move your body. There's less punishment. There's less, I have to do it because of a certain external motivator. You start to feed it better and listen to it more. So it becomes all kind of interconnected. So by starting with this dialogue and understanding the dialogue, and then trying to shift the focus on, your strengths and what your body can do versus what it can't do, that turns into some gratitude. So a gratitude practice, taking care of yourself, trying to think about how can I reduce the stress in my life, whether it's internal dialogue stress or just all the different stressors that we feel from external things that are happening in the world. We all know that there's a lot of that. How can I live in the present moment, maybe do some mindfulness exercises, grounding exercises, be more present with ourselves, be kinder to ourselves. I talk a lot about self-compassion, wearing comfortable clothes, cleaning up some of our social media feeds. If we're looking at social media and all we see are things that make us feel bad about ourselves, or that we're comparing ourselves or judging ourselves or criticizing ourselves, then that just spirals down the opposite direction. So, sometimes it's taking a look and filling your feed with things that empower you or help you feel good about yourself. And those are some kind of things that we can start on this journey. And if people are dieting or going on and off diets, just kind of asking yourself, how's it working for you? Yo-yo dieting, which I was a professional, I'm not anymore, right? But I was a professional. It's out there, it's everywhere, it's all you see. And it's no wonder that we turn back to it. And can you ask the question, well, how's that been working for me now? And if it hasn't been working for me, maybe I should try something else. And that's where some of this other work comes in.
So many great tips. So, so valuable for people to hear. I love that idea of the good gift, bad gift. That is such a great analogy. That really struck me when you talked about that.
I think it was part of what's really helped me on this journey too. And to think about, who I am as a person. Intuitive Eating is a great book. It has a real great kind of a framework for moving into seeing yourself differently and listening to your body and such. But they have an exercise called the Petals of Worth, and it's a flower. And in the flower, you write down in each petal, there's like 10 petals. In each petal, you write down something that you like about yourself or that you're grateful of yourself that is non-physical. Why do people like to hang around you? Kind of like I talked about a little bit earlier. By filling that out, you really understand that we're so much more than the body. And if we can focus on those qualities and those traits as we do the healing work around all of this, it can, I have people that have those flowers pinned up on their fridge or pinned up in their bathroom to just remind them of who they are. That's the person we want to bring forward, like that podcaster that you were talking about. Once she saw herself differently, she was able to show up differently. And so there's so many people that hopefully we can help them see themselves differently. And then they can, show up to the world differently, because we need everybody.
So true. That is my hope. And this has been so amazing. Such a great conversation. Can you please share where everyone can find you?
Sure. Well, my story, if you want to read any of that, it's called The Body Joyful: My Journey from Self-Loathing to Self-Acceptance. And anyone who wants to do a free chat, and get one of the chapters called Brownies, very fun chapter, they could just email me at anne@thebodyjoyful.com, and I will be more than happy to share that chapter with them and, have a conversation if they'd like.
Perfect. Everyone, go check out Anne. Her link to her book and her email will be in the show notes. So definitely go check that out. Anne, thank you so much for this. So valuable of a conversation. This is really, really, really great. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Desiree, for allowing me to be here with you and share this important story with all of your listeners. So grateful for you and what you do.
And thank you so much for being here today and sharing not only your story, but also your expertise. It is so needed and necessary in today's society, especially because we are enmeshed in that diet culture. So I really appreciate you coming on. If you liked this episode, please share it and tag me on social media at The Wellness Project with Des. You can do that on either Instagram or Facebook. And I would love for you to become a part of my Facebook community. I'm in there every day with mental health content. You should also join my email list since my podcast is bi-weekly. So the best way to hear from me is following me on Instagram, joining my Facebook community, and getting on my email list so that you don't miss a thing. I regularly post journal prompts, mental health content, I share my blogs. So go ahead and check the show notes for the links on the various ways that you can connect with me. Every episode of The Wellness Project has an episode page full of detailed show notes and the links where you could find my guests. According to des.com/123 for detailed show notes and everywhere you can find Anne. Thanks for joining me today. I will see you in 2 weeks with another incredible guest. Talk to you then.